Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
Shawn Livermore is with us today, the author of the Amazon best-selling business nonfiction book. And when I say bestseller, we're not talking about just one category, not just two categories, but from what I understand, 5 categories, 5 separate categories in Amazon's bestseller list. Shawn Livermore is with us, the author of Average Joe, Be the Silicon Valley Tech Genius. Shawn, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me.
So you wrote this book. You got it out there. The book just released, in fact, in October?
Yeah.
What compelled you to write this book?
Writing the book was sort of a culmination of 21 years in the tech industry. And I think for myself, a personal passion to really outline and curate the true narrative journey of someone who enters the tech industry with 0 skills and gets to the other side of that spectrum at a level of mastery of craft, and learning how to teach others who I've mentored along the way, or just kind of our paths have crossed from going through that spectrum of binary versus color. And what I mean by that is there's this idea of this tech genius, this persona, this Elon Musk, this Steve Jobs, that there's always going to be one of those personas out there. And we in tech position ourselves with a binary, am I or am I not a genius or a tech brilliant entrepreneur, founder of a company that will go viral and whatnot. In reality, it's a broad spectrum of color. And so we have to unlearn some things, and we have to not play the game that they try to get us to play, and psychometric scores and PhDs, hiring other PhDs, and that whole game of intelligence, and move beyond that. And so the book really does solve the riddle, and it exposes and debunks the myth of the tech genius. But then in a very satisfying twist, kind of halfway through the book, it actually teaches you how to become the tech genius myth yourself. And so there is no such thing as a tech genius. Oh, wait, there is. It sort of does exist, and you can become it. And that's the juxtaposition of the book.
Average Joe, Be the Silicon Valley Tech Genius. How can we translate that into the world that we talk about every day here on the show, which is the music industry? And let me preface that by saying many of the people that work within the music industry are the creative types, and that's their strong suit. That's what they do. They envision and give birth to these beautiful bodies of work. But when it comes to the implementing the business side of things, the tech side of things, that's kind of where they fall short. I think part of that is an education process. And I think another part of it is probably they don't think they can do it, or they don't feel that they can do it.
It's true. I think there's a couple of factors in the pie chart for creators. And, it's interesting. A lot of the software engineers and developers and technology professionals I know are actually musicians. I'm a musician. I play a little amateur guitar and piano, and love the guitar, acoustic. Got a Taylor at home. It's my baby. But when it comes to the flow state, as something we talk about in the book of when a musician goes into this kind of sensory numb moment where the muscle memory kicks in and they don't know what their fingers are doing. They just know how to kind of get that rhythm started, is very similar to when a programmer sits down and writes code and puts headphones on. There's a brain stimuli. I actually worked with a neuroscientist for 3 months in 2020, and we developed a creativity framework that could be used by anyone, whether you're a musician or a developer or any profession, called the Slow Create framework. And it allows you to systematically, it's embedded in the book, chapters 3, 4, 10, etc. But it allows you to systematically plot out your creative work and then stack that into a pipeline, from a canvas into a pipeline, and then learn how to communicate that in what we call a triad. And that 3-step journey can really help you move the needle in terms of writing a song or moving your production studio along or any sort of creative aspect of your journey and building that startup or, pursuing that dream. The other side of that, though, is the flow state, and getting into that flow state, aside from your creative work, aside from what you can or can't do very well or what you feel great about. And the flow state, according to those who actually originated it, I'm going to totally butcher the guy's name, but it's like a 20-character name, Seismahali Nancy or something here. I don't think anyone pronounces it right, but he's got some good videos online about the flow state. You'll find the name if you look up flow state on YouTube, but it's coveted, but it's unreliable. It's something that I think we seek out and we look for. It's even a movement. People really base their hopes. They hang and fulcrum every part of their creative work on the ability to get into that flow state. And yet the best work that happens is not always in sort of a brain cycle flow state. And so anyway, I find it fascinating as we did the research and really put forward the data in a composition of a book, how many people hang their hopes on the flow state. And it's a beautiful moment. There's a musician, Lily Hingham from England, and she runs a Scottish cyberpunk band called L-Space. And a Scottish magazine interviewed her, and she described the flow state about not really thinking about the movement of the fingers, but it flowing out of her body as if the instrument is an extension of their body, and they kind of morph into this creation. Another guy is James McCall, American rapper, No Can Do. He describes a flow state like he's sticking his hand out in a waterfall, and he's feeling the water. It's flowing through his hands into buckets, and he's able to just kind of grab the water and maneuver it into different buckets. And there's this creative control that he seems to have of something that is very hard to control.
Let's talk about flow state for a moment. It's obviously in one of the chapters in your books, chapter 5, I believe. The flow state, is this something that can come naturally? Is it something that's embedded in you from the beginning, or is it something you can learn to do? Or how does that come about? Two questions here, I guess. How do you know that you're in the flow state, and how do you get to that point? Or is that something that, is it organic and biological, or is it something you can learn?
Well, we don't even know if there is such thing as a flow state. We believe there is because in 1975, Mahali Csikszentmihalyi invented it or made mention of it. But I do believe there's a human aspect to it. I believe the brain from I'm not a neuroscientist, of course. I just learned from one. Dr. Jesse Rissman, PhD, out of University of California, Los Angeles. He is a brilliant neuroscience professor, and he taught me quite a bit. I feel like I did earn a master's in it by the time we were done. But he taught me about the subconscious, or the unconscious, as many refer to it, and the conscious, and how you think it many times that you're going from a conscious active state to an unconscious or a subconscious state, and that it's a binary on-off switch, but it's actually very blurry. It's actually very blurry. And why is that important? Because in the flow state, you are dancing in the middle. You are sort of flowing in and out of this gray area of control. And the control is a key word. He described to me the aspects of control where you have 1% or 99%. You typically never have 100 or 0, but you're in this wavelength of control. And so as a musician, working the craft, building your I've written songs. I've probably written 20 or 30 songs, which isn't a lot for a musician, but hey, throwing some stuff out there and seeing what works. But the level of control that I had in that moment was greatly impacted by bias, by personal belief systems, by environmental aspects or influences, historical effort toward that song, iteration. So there's a lot more that goes into your work, is the point I'm trying to make. Whether there is a flow state or not, whether it's strong with you, the force is strong with you, Jedi, right? Like, you may or may not have a really good flow indicator. Maybe your flow capacitor is broken. It doesn't really matter. And that's the encouraging word I would offer, an inspirational word, is that if your flow capacitor, if you're flow challenged, then it's okay. You don't have to get up at 5 a.m. You don't have to have all the hype and hustle. You don't have to motivate yourself to be, quote, successful at any sort of endeavor. It's really not about the amount of velocity you throw at the problem. It's a pie chart of maybe 15 different factors that confluence together to help you put that song together or to help you put that problem in its rightful solution.
We're going to take a break, get a word in from one of our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to have some more conversation with Shawn Livermore, who's the author of the Amazon best-selling business nonfiction book, Average Joe, Be the Silicon Valley Tech Genius.
You're listening to the business side of music.
When you have a Korg synth at your fingertips, the possibilities are endless. Be it digital, analog modeling, altered FM, wave sequencing, or the multi-engine synth, Korg gives you easy access to a variety of features to help you get the perfect sounds quickly. Whether you're a professional musician or just starting out, Korg truly has a synthesizer to help you express yourself. Visit Korg.com or your favorite Korg dealer to get your hands on one of their products to create new music always. Korg, the official sponsor of the business side of music.
Hi everyone, I'm Larry Butler, and I want to send you a free digital copy of my new book, The Singer-Songwriter Rulebook, 101 Ways to Help You Improve Your Chances of Success. That's right, everything you need to know to launch your career as a singer-songwriter, all based on my 40 years in the live performance arena, and believe me, I've seen it all. In my book, you'll find the 10 things you have to deal with before even thinking about becoming a singer-songwriter performer. You'll also learn about the 5 things every singer-songwriter can do this weekend to make their live show better. 5 things I can guarantee that you are not doing already. Plus, there's tips on songwriting and staging, photo and video shoots, publishing, merch, dozens of other topics. All written for people who don't particularly like to read. And again, it's free. Just go to the Business Side of Music website homepage and look for my book cover. Click on it, and a free digital copy of my book will be yours. I'm Larry Butler, and I approve of this message.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back with us, Shawn Livermore, who is the author of the Amazon best-selling business nonfiction book. Remember what I said in the beginning of the show. It's not just in one category. It's in 5 categories. So you definitely need to check it out. The title of the book is Average Joe, Be the Silicon Valley Tech Genius. We talk about being in the flow state, being creative. Your book goes a little deeper, though, into some things. One of the things I read was you sat down with Shawn Ellis at one point, the originator of growth hacking, which I'm going, okay, what in the heck is growth hacking? And what does that have to do with, and of course, he talks about the story of DropBox. And where does that all fit into play?
Yeah, it's great. It's wonderful to hear someone say, what is growth hacking? Because in my business, that is it's almost like, what is oxygen? For us in the tech industry, it's become so mainstream. But growth hacking, first of all, is this sort of, well, you've heard of hacking, right?
Oh, yeah.
And, so you imagine a hooded individual, it's a nighttime, they're eating a lot of potato chips and they're at their keyboard, and it's very conspicuous looking work they're doing with a command line on the monitor, some really confusing code on the screen, and they're hacking into the mainframe and they're stealing data and whatnot. This idea of cheating the system or shortcutting process, right? So if you want to grow a company, typically it's an arduous climb, but if you growth hack, you're just driving a wedge right into the mountain and you're digging a tunnel right through, and you're doing in 5 minutes what it took 5 months for someone else to do. That's a hack, right? That's a shortcut. And so to growth hack is to grow your company through shortcuts. And so these companies that launch, and you see them on the NASDAQ ringing the bell, and these young 22-year-olds that are now worth $1 gazillion, these are the growth hacking geniuses that we talk about. And a lot of the young techies that, enter the industry, they have these aspirations and dreams that are completely unfounded, unrealistic. And it's all based on watching the 2013 movie Aaron Sorkin wrote, The Social Network, with the story of Facebook, right? I'm sure a lot of people out there have probably seen that movie. But anyway, it details this dream world of Fantasyland where young people can contrive solutions and it goes viral. And now they're worth hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars. And so that fallacy has turned into this industry, this cottage industry, and then has become mainstream in the tech world, growth hacking. And so the guy who originated that phrase was a man named Shawn Ellis, and he walked into a company called DropBox in 2008. just as Bitcoin was being launched in that same kind of very interesting period of time for the tech industry. He was meeting the founders and the 8 developers that were there, and they were worth a couple $1 million at the time. And Ellis came in and he came from a background of bringing companies public. He had already done some really great work, and he's a really nice guy. Here in Southern California, not too far from myself, we had a hamburger in 2019. We were talking through his story, and he installed a culture of experimentation. And what I mean by that is when you market, when you advertise your business, whether it is a production company or music producer or a musician or band or whatnot, you are putting the word out, right? And you're trying to get those gigs and you're trying to land the contracts. And in his business, for what they were doing, it was a B2C, business to consumer company. And so you would download the Dropbox product, you would install it, and it would synchronize and back up all your files on your computer. Very helpful product. Love the product. I'm a diehard Dropbox fan. Love the product. They began to test out what marketing messages would work the best. And so some of them worked, some of them didn't. But he had a secret in his back pocket, a conversation he had with Jamie Siminoff, the founder of the company Ring, which was bought by Amazon for $1 billion. Jamie had mentioned a special principle that he learned in his experimentation. And that secret was in Ellis's back pocket for 6 months before he dropped it into a marketing experiment that yielded a 300% increase one day. Now, that's a big deal because normally they're dealing with 1% increase, 5% drop, 8% increase, 3% drop, whatever. But to go up 300%, I mean, the whole world kind of stopped, right? And so they began to then explode that one experiment into 100 different other experiments, and they found the one that worked consistently. And that secret, if you're wondering, is called the principle of mutual benefit. Chapter 4 is all about it. And so if the sender and receiver both receive something like megabyte storage, for example, they are much more likely not only to send the invite, but also to receive and download and install the product. And so all that being said, the growth hacking model and the idea of taking those shortcuts and being able to have that magic is sort of what the book unpacks to demystify, because everyone would point to that guy and say, man, he was the guy. He was the guy with the plan and he knew what to do. And without that guy, we would have never gotten there. But in fact, they probably would have figured it out eventually with all their experimentation. But that was the growth hacking story and the magic that the magic dust that we sort of highlight.
I think when we talk about Silicon Valley and those, I guess we can call them tech geniuses, the tech founders, the CEOs, do you feel that they were more marching to their own drum or were they corporate driven? And the reason I ask that is because, once again, we get back to the musicians in the world. We get back to the creatives in the world. Maybe I should say it this way. Do you think that those Elon Musks, those Steve Jobs, those Shawn Ellises, do you think they were more of an independent entrepreneur, and were they allowing the creative flow state to work in their favor to get where they wanted to get?
I think that there are a variety of factors, and it depends on the person. It's very unique timing for all of those candidates you mentioned. Bill Gates, I'll throw that in the mix too. He, at a young age, had access to a mainframe computer at the university, and he pushed for more access. And now, sure, he was brilliant. He is brilliant, but he also had access. And I think there are a lot of people that don't. Steve Jobs had some interesting experiences in his early life, and he met Steve Wozniak. Jobs without Wozniak, well, I'm not sure it would have turned out the same way. And you look at Elon Musk, brilliant man, and what he had access to and the amount of hard work he had to put in, and he overcame a lot. We'll see how the story ends, but he's kind of the real world Iron Man. And I think that's an interesting analogy that the press likes to throw on to these tech founders. I don't really have an answer for him yet, but I don't think I need to. I think he's done great work. I think there's still more than intelligence at work here. There's fearlessness. You have to look at, how someone comes into the picture and how they operate, and the effort, the determination, the calibration, the proximity to greatness, and who is also around you. What investors are you fortunate to meet? Where do you live in the world? There's a great TED talk on timing and how timing was the number one factor that determined the success of most of these large tech startup companies. But I do think there's a little bit of magic dust, but the magic dust that I'm referring to is not innate. It's contrived. And when I say it's contrived, most of the time, it's what I believe unsustainable mystique. It's this short-term forced situation where an innovator is putting forth something that may or may not work. When Uber started, they had a pitch deck, and in reviewing every slide and doing my research, and my research team and I, they didn't know how to handle regulation. They had no idea that the taxi medallion system was going to penalize them and how to get out of that. They got cease and desist letters when they launched because they were violating all the San Francisco city laws. There was a lot running against Uber, but they stepped boldly with investors behind them, and they violated on purpose the rules, and they created a whole new industry. Being fined millions and millions of dollars didn't matter because they were creating billions and billions of dollars of value. So going back to that magic dust, this is what I talk about in chapter 10 as having this sustainable mystique. And it's like this triad concept where you work on an interesting problem at the bottom of the triangle. You narrow your focus on one side of the triangle, and you use articulate speech with a couple different methods on the other side. And using those three techniques, the problems you choose to solve, the narrow focus, and the articulate speech, anyone can learn how to crystallize their subject matter, present that information to family, friends, investors, anyone around you, and be able to drive them upward toward fascination. And fascination is the goal. Whenever you speak, for someone to become fascinated is the goal. And I can just say that with absolute certainty. And I don't know anyone who could, no one so far has provided to me a counter to that statement that is valid, that when you speak, fascination should be the goal. Sure, love and joy and harmony and humankind and all those things given, but from an entrepreneurial perspective. So that's kind of where this magic dust trail leads us, is speaking to fascinate.
We're going to take a break, get another word in for another one of our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to have some more conversation with Shawn Livermore, who is the author of the Amazon best-selling business nonfiction book, Average Joe, Be the Silicon Valley Tech Genius.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Are you curious about Gordon Lightfoot's songwriting process, or what it was like working with Prince in the 80s? Have you ever given any thought to what goes into a golf course design or writing a book? I'm Steve Waxman, the host of The Creationist, a podcast about people who create. Each episode features a different creator sharing stories that I hope will inspire your own creativity. The Creationist is available now on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Since 1963, Korg has been creating new experiences in music and performance. That is what drove the creation of some of Korg's most legendary products, such as the Poly 6, the M1, the Electribe, the Triton, the Minilogue, the Kronos, Wave State, Op 6, and most recently the Nautilus, which is what we have here in our studio. Korg is dedicated to creating new, innovative, and uncompromising instruments which maintain the highest quality to inspire music makers, past, present, and future. Visit Korg.com or your favorite Korg dealer to get your hands on one of their products and start creating new music always. Korg, the official sponsor of the business side of music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio, Shawn Livermore, the author of the Amazon best-selling business nonfiction book. And I've said it once, I'll say it again, in 5 categories. You need to check it out on Amazon. Average Joe, Be the Silicon Valley Tech Genius, is with us today. I want to bounce around for a minute here, something we talked about before the show started, the fraudulent Mozart letter of 1815.
Yeah, this was fascinating. So there's this manuscript that was copied and pointed to for hundreds of years as the true source of genius. This is what genius looks like. And if you don't have this, you must not be one. This is what creativity looks like. If you can't create like this, you're not creative and you should stop trying. And the letter goes something like this. In fact, I'll read you the letter. Okay, it's very short. This is most of the letter. Very quick. He says, "When I am, as it were, completely myself, entirely alone and of good cheer, traveling in a carriage, walking after a good meal, or at night when I can't sleep, it's on these occasions that my ideas flow and most abundantly. All this fires my soul, and I am provided I am not disturbed, my subject enlarges itself, becomes methodized and defined, and the whole, though it be long, stands almost finished and complete in my mind, so I can survey it like a fine picture, a beautiful statue at a glance. I don't hear any in my imagination the parts successively, but I hear them all at once, and I write them down, committing to paper, It's quick enough for everything is, as I said before, already finished. And it rarely differs on paper from what was in my imagination. That's the letter.
Wow.
It's an interesting idea, right, of creativity. Now, anyone out there writing music, creating a beautiful melody, harmony, production quality sound, there's no way you can imagine all that. I don't care how brilliant you are on the instrument or how long you've been in the industry. It takes iteration, right? One track over the other. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't think Mozart would be able to defend this letter. In fact, it was proven to be a forgery years later. And Otto Von is the investigator that proved it to be a forgery. And yet this amazing genius talent puts everyone else's heads down in shame and turns us away as failures, right? And Kevin Ashton, in his book, How to Fly a Horse, he really digs into this genius sighting and this creativity aspect. And Maybelline, 1991 campaign. Maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's Maybelline, right? This natural beauty. We can't live up to what this means for us. And so this has actually permeated society. And in 1904, a guy named Havelock Ellis did an exhaustive study of all these intellectually gifted kids. They looked at hair color, eye color, their birth, where they were born, any other factors, and they just could not find the genius factor. What was it? Did they all eat asparagus after 8 p.m.? No, we don't know. And the IQ curve, who invented that? Well, back in the early 1900s, there were this idea that we could categorize recruits for the war a little better if we know who goes in the trenches and who stays in the tent and works on strategy. And so they had them take tests and talk to them, and they'd evaluate their abilities, and they would score them, and they'd give them a number. And that number dictated what they did. That was their societal dystopian future that they had for themselves. So it was kind of a sad reality when that permeates society, and you don't get to go to the college you want to because you didn't fill in the right bubble on the SAT test, right? It's tough. Life has some harsh realities for us. But that creativity and that intelligence overlap, that has been such a challenge for the human race in the last 100 years. And so we write about that in the book. We talk about the fallacy of these geniuses and these creative minds, and big C creativity and little c creativity. And I think a lot of people want that big C moment. They want that bolt of blue from the ether, that song that just boom comes into your head while you're driving. Hurry, write it down, and oh no, it's gone. The idea is gone forever. Sure, that's something that happens, but innovation is more about iteration than it is about inspiration. And so I remember someone saying that creativity is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. And I think a lot of the riffs and a lot of the guitar solos that you hear, and I think about people who write songs like Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. That song is an amazing story, and it went through multiple people's hands over 20 years to get to the point where it became something. And as Malcolm Gladwell describes it, it was genius. It wasn't genius yet. It was formative. It was iterating on itself. It was working its way through the human race until it found its rightful place, and then it sort of blossomed, right? So I find the creativity issue to be quite fascinating for the musical industry as well as for the tech industry, that we get really hung up on this area.
Do you think being a genius gets in the way of being creative? You can kind of, maybe you can resort back to the TV show Big Bang Theory. Here's Sheldon, who is just, this amazing genius with an IQ of, I think, they say he's got an IQ of 187, the character. But he can't seem to get out of his own way because he's so brilliant. Do you think that being extremely intelligent and being creative can get in the way of each other? Is it like magnets of the same polarity? Or do you think they can run parallel to each other?
That's a very interesting question. I think that is the juxtaposition that we find ourselves in. I think it's rhetorical. If you're smart, does that mean you're creative? Well, maybe not. If you're creative, does that mean you're smart? Well, maybe not by standardization definitions of psychometrics, but I think they get in the way of each other many times. I know a lot of brainy people. Hey, Shawn, blah, 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 blah. And they tell me their detailed information. I'm like, well, I don't even know what you're talking about. Well, you have the curse of knowledge. You're way too deep in the weeds. Why don't you come up back for shallow conversation? Let's have small talk. I know someone with Asperger's syndrome, and whenever I talk to this person, it's so deep. It just like, you can't even, it's like, hey, let me tell you what I did. I worked on the vacuum. It's like, well, I don't really and then they go into the vacuum and how it works with the rubber and the hair and the vacuum, and disassemble the whole thing. You know, I think a lot of dads out there are like, yeah, what's wrong with that? We all talk about this stuff, don't we? I'm like, no, the brainy nature of it is really inhibiting the creative nature sometimes. But I take that back, because even in the braininess and the nerding out on, geeking out on a topic, you're being creative within that, aren't you? And you're creating value sometimes. And I think a lot of people in very brainy careers or science careers or STEM careers, they're creating all sorts of masterful things, right? And we respect and love and appreciate that. So I don't know. I think it depends on how we really classify these words, but it's dangerous to get yourself in a situation where you don't create. That's the biggest problem. And that's the biggest topic that I think deserves the most attention, is the stoppage and the blockage. What is your blockage, right? What is your brick wall, or what Elliot Hutchinson called the wall of frustration? What is your wall of frustration?
Yeah, and I think we all deal with that in the music business, is that wall of frustration, especially with what's going on now, and getting out of your own way, I would think.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
How can people find you? How can they get this book?
We can go to the website, averagejoetechgenius.com, and to hear more about the Slow Create framework, you can go to slowcreate.com. And if you need any software, I'm running a software company here in Southern California. That's at productperfect.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at Shawnee Pants.
Shawn, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound design by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.
Never had one lesson.
This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.